Hi students, it's Arthur, and we are now moving on to the third video in the interview series. And this one's really going to be talking about mastering common interview questions and dealing with the other questions as well. So we're going to be focusing on the 8 most common questions you're likely to face and how to answer them effectively from a student's perspective. Then we'll also talk about basically how to handle other questions as well. One of the key points I always emphasize in this kind of area is the importance of involvement and engagement in organizations, volunteering, and clubs. Why do I do this? Because these activities really help you build really valuable skills and provide you with stories that showcase these skills in context. It's going to give you a lot more chances to develop experiences which will essentially be a substitute for actual work experience, since you don't have roles unless you have a really strong internship that really does relate directly to a position you might be interviewing for. These experiences will, though, allow you to stand out in interviews. Many students overlook these opportunities, but those who seize upon them can really differentiate themselves throughout the interview process, which is exactly what you're trying to do here. It's critical for you to realize that the interview phase of job search is essentially about differentiating yourself from a very small group of people. You can't always do that on the day, but if you prepare for that day now, and what I mean by now is getting involved, getting engaged, developing stories, looking for great internships, learning about transferable skills and how they can apply to your role, doing all that preparation, and then specifically about the company and the role when you're interviewing. Trust me, you can get there and showcase your experiences and the potential when you need to do so in front of the hiring manager. It's about planning, it's about preparation, and it's about actually getting out there and doing, not just thinking. So I want you to think about answering questions in a couple of different ways. So let's think about this a bit broadly. One of the things that's going to be really important when you get into the interview process is using your active listening skills. So here we're talking about listening to understand, not listening to respond. We need to know the question's intent before we can provide a relevant answer. And I'm going to give you that context for these 8 questions, and we're going to talk about this in a broader concept throughout. But picture this, right? Look at the graphic. Water being absorbed into a sponge versus water splashing off of a brick. The sponge represents listening to understand, where you're able to fully take in what the interview's saying and being able to use that to create a situation where you're able to use that water again in your own response, right? So the brick represents listening to respond, when you're only half listening, thinking about your next answer. Obviously, we want you to aim to be the sponge. The other side of this is connecting the dots, or in this graphic, building the Jenga tower. So we need to translate our knowledge into relevant stories. Think of your knowledge as a mess of these Jenga blocks. Your goal is to build a solid Jenga tower. That's going to be a cohesive story that demonstrates or weaves together your experiences and skills in context. This is going to give the hiring manager the ability to see how your background fits their needs. So research, networking, understanding the role description, and how the role helps the company succeed is kind of like detailed instructions on how to construct that Jenga tower. Preparation is really critical to get you ready to tell your stories that will answer the questions. You're not going to be able to do this on the fly. Even professionals who've been in the workplace 20, 30, 40 years, they still have to prepare in a very similar way to handle these stories, to be able to answer the questions in a very relevant context. So it's not important just to have one story for each question. And a lot of students get really hung up on that because they don't have that many stories. But in fact, you need to understand that many of your individual stories don't just showcase one skill or experience, but in fact several. It's a matter of how you explain the challenge and the skills needed to drive a positive result. Then, your response should of course be relevant to the role and company, showing that you have the skills and know how to use them in context to deliver value to stakeholders. Keywords, using examples that align with the job description and the requirements, and using your active listening skills to address points brought up during the discussion are key differentiators for you in the interview process. And then talking about tactics. These are the considerations in handling questions effectively. Most answers should be concise, only lasting 90 to 120 seconds, so no more than 2 minutes. Complex questions, questions that are multi-part, which are can be like behavioral interview questions, never go over 3 minutes. Not certain about what the question intent is, or maybe you didn't hear the question properly, never be afraid to ask them to repeat or rephrase the question. A great strategy here is to write down the question as they're explaining it so that you're able to look at it and understand if you've answered the question effectively. A lot of students, particularly, well, not students, I'm sorry, a lot of interviewers will ask very complex question and the interviewees don't listen to the whole question. They start to think about their answer before the interviewer has even finished with their question. How can you answer a question if you don't know the whole question, right? So what we want you to do is to think, we actually want you to listen through the entire question before you even start to think about answering it. Because if you've done all the preparation, you'll be able to come up with a story that matches up to what they want. Trust me. The other thing is we want you to take the time and active listening skills to watch out for nonverbal cues. Find out if they're really absorbed in the conversation, if you're actually making a connection. One way to help build that rapport and build that connection is to use their name frequently when you're responding. Well, Arthur, that's a great question. Well, let me think about that for a minute, Arthur. Arthur, you know what? I think I have a good response for this. Let me explain to you what happened in this situation. Using their name often builds rapport very, very effectively. And then finally, we're going to talk about closeouts at the end of this presentation. And this is really going to be about talking about how to weave things together with the job description, weave things together with things that you've learned during the conversation. And the most important part of the strategy, though, isn't just what you're going to say. We're talking a lot about those tactics. That is only a part of the total equation. How you will say it, tone, body language, the energy and enthusiasm you bring to the interview, all of that matters. In fact, it may be the most important thing that you need to master in the interview process is to bring that energy and enthusiasm to the interview. One key strategy is to work on and memorize the 8 core interview questions. Studies show that most interviews contain these same core questions or variations of these in one way or another. Your ability to execute these well can give you a real boost of confidence that'll help you during the entire interview. Some interviewers will ask questions that seem more complex, but they're still searching for the same core skills as the simple question. Just ask the interviewer to restate the question if you're unsure. This is a quality every good interviewee should have in your arsenal. No fear of asking them, "What do you mean?" Remember, every question is asking you the same thing. Why are you a great fit for this position? So your answer should be relevant and display your research on the company and the role expectations to show alignment with what the role calls for. And again, make sure that you're answering these questions succinctly and to the point. These are the questions that we're going to go through, and the ones that are highlighted in bold, we're going to give you a little bit of a deeper dive on these 3. So the first question is, tell me about yourself. This is the one that is almost a total lock will get asked because it's a great starter question for an interview. It's also a very dangerous one, quite frankly. It's deceptively simple, but one that many people just don't understand. To give you context, there are 2 reasons this question is asked. First, obviously it's a good way to get the conversation started, like you would in a networking event. But remember, this is not a networking event. Secondly, they want to hear what you lead off with to present yourself and your qualifications to do the job you're interviewing for. This is not about walking me through your resume. This is not about unstructured rambling, talking about what you like to do in your free time. And this is not about saying nothing that relates to the role. This is definitely not a personal question. They're looking for confidence in your abilities, their confidence in yourself, your strengths, and most importantly, why you're a great fit for the position. And why this question is important. It will allow you to get off on the right foot in the conversation, to guide it, so to speak. This is a great way of reinforcing or making a very strong first impression in a way. This will allow you the opportunity at the very beginning of the conversation to highlight why you are there and emphasize what you think is important for them to know. The why you. Also, it'll give you a chance to show off some of your research and understanding of the role and how you can meet those objectives. This is a great place to start. It's a great place to stick your landing, but it's also a very slippery slope. Making a mistake here at the very first question, again, with one that we know is coming, can really derail your interview very quickly if you can't handle this one. One of the ways that we talk about answering this question is to use the present, past, future approach, where you're going to tie together your story with the job requirements and the company research that you've done. Some typical traps. I've already mentioned a couple of these. Thinking that this question is, just restating your resume. And in fact, sometimes the question actually sounds like that. That's what they want. Walk me through your resume. Let me tell you, they should have. If they haven't looked at your resume, it's probably a red flag and you should go running anyway. But they've looked at your resume. Why are you just going to restate a document that you've just let them read? And again, this is not a personal question. And if you think it's a personal question, remember, it's just not. The other thing we're looking for is a balance. We're looking for is a balance of modesty and arrogance. We want confidence, but we do want a bit of a humble response here. And then, unlike your professor, unstructured rambling is very, very unhelpful here. Be concise and be relevant. So this is an example of how to handle a tell me about yourself question using the present, past, future approach. So just to read through it, I've always been a people person. Even in school, I'm happiest talking to and listening to people, even strangers, especially if I can support them in some way. That's why I'm excited about my concentration in professional selling. I've learned that sales is a perfect fit for me, and I've confirmed that with my involvement in my professional selling classes, in my active participation in the sales club, and in the sales competitions. Also, my part-time jobs have given me fantastic skills to learn more about people, and I've learned how to help them faster through active listening. My professional goal is to help others learn and solve their problems. It brings together my lifelong interest in helping others and my passion to improve customer relations by coming up with creative solutions. That's why this role is so interesting to me. So yeah, it sounds a little canned, of course, but you know what? This is the kind of response that's really going to land very well with a hiring manager. One thing I want you to focus on here is that the underlined words are keywords taken from the job description or research that you can do on the role. And that's where you want to sprinkle these keywords, sprinkle these responsibilities in throughout your responses, not only to this question, although this is a great place to start, but also throughout the rest of your questions and your responses in the interview. The second question is, why should we hire you? This is also usually an early question as well. And now we're starting to cut to the chase. These questions, or this question in particular, is often used as a screener question or a weed out question in the interview process early, because here we're actually checking for a few things very quickly. So as this is usually early in the process and maybe early in the interview process itself, you're going to be nervous as is, right? So now you have to step up and answer this kind of bombshell of a question. Well, fortunately, you've listened to me and you've studied the company and you understand the role very well. That's going to be important because that's one of the main reasons for the question, to see if you've done your homework, that you understand the role and why it's important to the company. how your experiences make you a good fit for the organization. It also allows you to explain why you're excited about joining the company. And then, of course, tying together all the research in here is an excellent way to demonstrate that. The traps to this question are giving a bland, canned response that doesn't show an understanding for the role, or a wandering answer that talks glowingly about the company when they don't have any experience. So now you can speak glowingly about the company, but unless you're able to show specific input from networking and understanding of the company through your research, that answer is not going to land very well. The third question here is, tell me about a time you exhibited leadership, or some variation of this question. And you'll notice that the tone of this question is a little bit different in terms of it sounds like a behavioral interview question. And you know what? There is a misconception here that this question is only for managers, but that's not true at all. And in fact, this question gets answered at entry-level interview questions all the time. So many people are expected to lead, such as leading a project, planning a company event, training coworkers on a software program. In addition to that, companies are looking for people who are high potentials and have the bandwidth to grow into more senior positions. And this is an opportunity to showcase that. What we're looking for is for you to define what leadership means to you. Here we're looking for self-awareness and what you're looking for in a leader as well. Write these things down, the qualities, skills, and actions you value in a leader, because they're very likely very aligned with how you want to lead. And again, this is our first behavioral interview type question, and we can approach this like we will our other behavioral interview questions, which means we're going to start with a story. And as you've done your research, you can cite elements of the job description that align with this, such as taking the lead on projects. If you don't have experience, lean in on your work at school or other activities where you did take the lead. And hopefully you have led a team to a successful result, whatever that was. In addition, a disappointing result can yield strong lessons as long as it wasn't a total disaster. So you can talk about situations that even weren't that great, but you actually learned something from. And again, you want to use the STAR method to develop your response. The traps for this question are pretty straightforward. We're looking to avoid coming across as arrogance, showing a lack of teamwork, taking all the credit, or a bland response not showing us taking the initiative. A fourth question, this one is a little bit of a trap question, frankly, and also you'll notice a behavioral one too. This question is about your character to a large degree, how you deal with challenges and conflict. This question is about you and not the difficult person or the situation. Although the STAR method will share the context, this is about how you dealt with the situation and the result that you achieved. Choose your story wisely here, and if possible, use an example where it's the person's job to make things difficult, like a call center employee and an interaction with that person, customer service, etc. But the intent will be to ensure that you're always the bigger person and not shift blame to the other person. The key things we're looking for is, did you listen? Did you empathize? Did you keep your cool? And were you organized in your approach to the resolution? The traps here are shifting blame. Taking ownership is appropriate here in many cases. We also want you to avoid showing an emotional reaction rather than an objective one. And this is an example, and I'm not going to read this one like I did the other one, but this example, there's also another example in the presentation notes. These will give you a good way of crafting a story, talking about the arc and the car story format, and using that style to create a situation where you talk about the issue, how you handled it, and what the results were. And again, you want to focus on the results. And so, the comment like, he was relieved as this led to lower stress levels for him and less work and stress for me too. What a great result that is, right? The fifth question is another behavioral style question, and this one's on teamwork. So here, interviewers are checking your ability to work within a team and your style or approach to team engagement. We're seeking to find out more about your communication skills as well. Are you a leader or a follower? Are you a collaborator? Are you an individual contributor? How did you respond to your teammates in certain situations? So share your understanding of the challenges of working on a team, how to manage egos, internal conflicts, competing versus cooperating, those kinds of things. The traps, similar to the other one, talking negatively about team members, going down a rabbit hole, wandering your conversation all over the place, again, arrogant or an emotional response. And then sometimes people will talk about a difficult situation or a team event, and they won't talk about what they learned in that situation. Lessons learned are very, very important. And again, there's an example in the presentation notes. The sixth question, this is something very easy and nice, right? Tell me about a time when you had success. What's your greatest accomplishment? This should be an easy one. You should be able to talk very nicely about this. Well, yeah, this actually is a little bit of a trap question too. And here the trap is pretty obvious. What we're looking for in this case is very arrogant responses. You're a problem child, or you have hero complex, inappropriately taking credit, as we say, so to speak. Or the opposite, too meek, passive, or disinterested. And if you don't tell the story, if any of your stories, if you don't tell this one with some emotion or passion, it's going to definitely be a red flag. And of course, the big thing that we're looking for here is your ambition, your attitude, or your definition of success. And this is more important than you realize. This will help them understand what your definition of success is and whether that aligns with what success means for that role and the business. A positive answer will blend your strong contributions with good cooperation among the team and showing more than just metrics as the success factors. Question number 7 is one where I see many candidates failing miserably, even leadership positions. One of the biggest fails in an interview that I was holding for a director level role in my organization. This guy totally flamed out on this question, and he was a very, very senior person, in his mid 40s at the time. And it just goes to show you, this is a skill that you can always continue to get better with. And where I see most candidates fall apart here is because this question is a little bit intentional in trying to do that. It's definitely a weed out question for sure. And there definitely is a right answer, but most people don't know what that is. But I'm going to tell you what the framework of that is for your interview. So what we want to know are that you are self-aware, honest, serious about your own personal development and advancement, or, on the negative side of this, hiding some red flags. Now, why would you divulge a red flag? Well, this question often throws off people, and a rambling answer without resolution can show us something. It might show us that red flag. The traps here are pretty straightforward. Playing up a skill that you think the employer wants to hear, such as, "Oh, I just work too hard." Or we actually get a little too honest with our weakness. When we start rambling, we actually cave and start to give too much info and then overshare a weakness in that end result. Or by not having a resolution to your weakness, something that you haven't put in place to fix it. So here are a couple of bad examples that don't turn a negative into a positive, but will instead get the eye-rolling response from most hiring managers. How we see these are that you're not self-aware and you put yourself, frankly, into a potentially negative situation. This first one talks about the work too much response. Well, at my previous job, my boss actually had to implement a rule that I needed to be out of the office by 7 p.m. because I was routinely staying past 9. But I did win the award for the highest sell-through rate, though, so maybe that was worth it, right? And the second one here is another typical one, is biting off more than I can chew. Well, I love learning new things, helping my colleagues, and getting right into the thick of things. I usually get the hang of things quickly, which leads me to take on a lot of stretch projects. Boy, it's funny how my bandwidth feels maxed out, but there's always room for more. Is there really? Now my question is, well, if you're doing a lot of these things, how well are you actually doing them? So I think these questions would actually lead me to believe that I have more of a yellow or red flag situation than I've got somebody that's an overachiever. So our strategy is, though, to spin a weakness as a strength, but we have to do this in the right way. So first of all, we advise you to pick something that you're really working on and hoping to improve. And I hope you really are doing that in some way. Describe how that's been a challenge for you in the past. Talk about the actions taken to improve it. Showcase the results of your actions. And then talk about how others acknowledge this improvement. And this is going to be successful. It highlights all the character elements we discussed earlier. And this is an example. About shy about providing constructive feedback to my colleagues and superiors, was always been afraid of hurting others' feelings. So in this type of a situation, really we're going to be talking about how we're dealing with that. And then again, the positive results of our work to improve ourselves. And then there's a second example on this on public speaking. So what we're going to be trying to do here is we're going to try to pick questions that are fairly safe topics and don't put us into harm's way. The first thing I'll tell you here is making sure you don't talk about a skill that you haven't fixed. And the second thing is you don't talk about a skill that is absolutely critical for success to that particular role. So things you can talk about here in similar grouping are procrastination, studying or research skills, delegation or perfectionism concerns. You could talk about how things came easily for me, but as I got to UNCW, I started to realize it was more competitive and difficult, and I challenged myself to improve, and this is how I did it. Another area is getting into the weeds because you really like to work, and we kind of talked about that one already. Public speaking and networking, this was a good one actually. Unless you're in a sales type role, I think this is a good one to use for a lot of people. Saying you're nervous or you're introverted, COVID issues, things of that sort, but you know how important it is and you challenge yourself to improve, and this is how I improved, and this were the results. And then technical skills not required for the job. So I mentioned don't mention skills that are really critical for the position. This is where I'm going with this. You might talk about technical skills that you don't have that really aren't important to the position, but the fact that you're a quick learner, you're very interested in this area, and you demonstrated you did something not required of you to learn something new. That initiative is a very positive skill that you can show. And then the final question that we'll talk about here is about a time you overcame an obstacle. And this one's a general one around problem solving. This one should be easier for those without much experience because we all have to figure out things and overcome problems in all aspects of our lives. Think about the time you've used your critical thinking skills and you had to do something that was action-oriented. So realize this question can be asked in a lot of different ways, but we're seeking the same kind of information. Tell me about a time you encountered a challenge at school. Have you ever made a mistake at work or in school? How did you handle it? What steps do you take before making a big decision? What would you do if you disagree with a decision made by your boss or a professor? So here, as with all questions, reflect on the job description and the role expectations and create a solution that directly aligns with that. If the role is customer facing, try to use an example of dealing with customers. If it's a technical role, recall a situation that's technical in nature. The traps here are basically answering the opposite of the intent, giving an answer not related to the role in some way, and also highlighting something that's very simple to resolve. The additional thing you want to do is you don't want to highlight a rogue style where you're kind of going off on your own. So in order for us to kind of conclude the topic, I've got some additional questions that you could run into that are fairly typical in a student interview. Obviously, talking about your major, what do you hope to do in your first job or internship and why? Those kinds of things are going to be pretty typical to kind of dig into your motivations and help them understand kind of what you're looking for and what drives you, what your passions are, what your underlying values are. Those kinds of things can be really important in terms of trying to find out if this is something that you're very certain about in your career or if it's something that you're very uncertain about, which could create some red flags in terms of bringing you on board. So the final questions or the final little grouping here are talking a little bit about some personality stuff and kind of where you want to go. So what are your career goals? I always like this kind of a question. I've never asked it like this, but would you rather be the pilot or navigator? Here we're really looking about whether you're someone that really wants to be in front, or if you're very comfortable kind of being behind the scenes, doing the detail work, those kinds of things. And talking about stress, do you have a mentor or role model? Here we're just looking ways of making sure that you have a good mental state, and you've got someone that you can talk to help you with coaching. And are we comfortable that you're going to be comfortable working in a stressful environment? And again, just to summarize our little golden rule for answering questions, and how does that relate to why you're a great fit for the role? Closeouts. Now, I mentioned this a bit earlier. Closeouts are really important because this is a way of kind of elevating a great question into just incredible, awesome question territory. And basically, you're going to think about ending your car stories with these kinds of closes. And, as you finish up your story, talk about the results and what you learned, and then you finish with, and that's the kind of challenge I'd really enjoy here at ABC Company. That's one of the reasons I'm really excited about this job. It feels like my previous positions and experiences would really be valued here. You could also bring in elements from the conversation you've heard so far, research elements that you've dug into, connections that you might have with the individual, and throw these in here as well as a very strong close, just to, again, differentiate you from every other candidate. Bringing something like this into an answer, again, helps us connect the dots, helps us to see you in this role, and will leave a very positive impression. The last one I want to mention too is that depending on how you perceive your body language and things of that sort, you may want to just reinforce understanding and just, let's say, confirm understanding perhaps. Might be a better way of putting that, and does that answer your question? I'd be happy to provide more details if you need it. That's one of the problems with very short answers in terms of saying that, we talked about earlier, not going more than 2 or 3 minutes. Sometimes it can be a very engaging conversation. So if it feels like they're really grabbed onto that story, your message, the value you're trying to generate, ask them if they want to talk about it a little bit more. Build on something very positive. And of course, interviews are so dynamic, so unique. It's impossible to put everything we could possibly think of and what you're going to deal with in the interview question and answer portion of the process. So if you have any more questions, absolutely let me know. Send them through the discussion groups. That'd be the ideal way so we can share the information together. So again, ask me questions about questions. And that's the end of this video. So I look forward to the next one, and I hope you appreciated the information that was shared in this one. We'll see you soon.